questions are going to be asked about what the Prime Minister knew, when the Prime Minister knew it, what his office did about that information. Those are important questions, but it doesn't change the fact that we ultimately need a public inquiry, because the questions that are being raised about foreign interference have the potential to make people feel less likely to vote.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's Chief of Staff, Katie Telford, takes the hot seat this Friday. She'll testify before a parliamentary committee investigating Chinese foreign interference in Canadian elections. Opposition parties have been calling for her appearance ever since new allegations surfaced that the Chinese government meddled in the 2019 and 2021 elections. Here with me now is a panel to discuss whether it should be Canada's top staffer in the hot seat or if accountability rests with the ministers themselves. Lori Turnbull is the director of the School of Public Administration at Dalhousie University. Alex Marland is a political science professor at Memorial University. And Tim Murphy is a former chief of staff to former Prime Minister Paul Martin. Thanks, gang. Appreciate you taking the time. Alex, as a proud graduate from Memorial University, I'm going to start with you. The government's pushed back against the Prime Minister's chief of staff testifying, but they eventually gave in. I mean, what's your take on having unelected government staffers testify at parliamentary committees?
So I get the reason why there's concern. I mean, really, political staff are not elected officials, so why should they be out in the forefront? But I would argue that ultimately, things have changed with social media now, and political staff are public figures in a way that they did not used to be. And not only that, but they have more power than they used to have. And so I think because they are so deeply embedded now in our system of government that if we talk about ideas about accountability, the idea that you could just go to Parliament and it's the minister, I mean, we all know that really party discipline is so strict now that it's really hard to hold ministers to account the way that the system was designed. So I don't have a problem with it. I think it's actually just a new normal.
Lori Turnbull, it certainly has become the new normal for Katie Telford. This is not her first time testifying. It's 2 or 3 times now. But you're calling for this broader examination of how our government structures work. I mean, what do you recommend on ensuring that accountability is in the right place?
Sure. I mean, to me, the fact that Katie Telford is going to testify, as you say, this is not her first time in front of a committee, not by far. And so it's not about whether we're thinking about a whole-scale constitutional evolution. That's not why she's there. She's there for political reasons. This is a back and forth between the parties about how to deal with a foreign interference issue. Clearly, things were heating up between the Liberals and the NDP. I suspect this is some kind of a concession that came out of those negotiations so that they can all move on. But I think more broadly, we need to be having conversations about what ministerial accountability means. It really is the bedrock of the system. If we don't have that, we don't have responsible government, we don't have other things. We can't just pull it out. But we should also be talking about why did more than half of the people not vote in the last Ontario election? How does that factor into the other issues? What are we doing about polarization? What are we doing about misinformation and disinformation? So to me, to get distracted by whether or not a staffer appears before committee is kind of losing the plot a bit.
Tim, you're a former chief of staff to a prime minister yourself. You never testified at committee. No. Katie Telford, this will be, her second or third appearance. What do you make of this? I mean, is this something that should be happening, or is this anathema to our system?
Well, it's political theater of the worst kind. And let's be clear. I mean, I heard tossed around words about accountability and the role of someone like Katie in testifying as a function of an accountability. But let's be clear. It's not about the accountability of Katie Telford. This is all an attempt to get through Katie Telford to the person to whom she is accountable, which is the Prime Minister. And I actually totally agree with Lori's take, which is fundamentally our system is built on the accountability of the elected officials, not the people they hire to support them in their functions. And that's why I think testifying by support staff is just wrong. They don't have an independent accountability to the broader public or even the people who sit in the House on the opposite side. Their accountability is to the person they hire. That person's accountability is to the broader public and the people in the House of Commons, and that's where it ought to lie. Now, that being said, do we have, obviously they've agreed to do that before, but it's, she's not going to be able to say all kinds of things. She's subject to an Official Secrets Act. She's subject to cabinet confidentiality, subject to her obligations to the person who employs her. I think it's just, they thought they had something that they could get on the Prime Minister, called someone who has no accountability to the public to try and do it. They ended up, the Liberals did resist it for a while, and I think ultimately lost the public opinion war over that. But it's a mistake. It's a mistake for how our system is supposed to function.
So, Alex Marland, on that point, if you want to get close to the heart of where the power is and the answers from the real decision makers in government, Why shouldn't the committee ask for the Prime Minister to come? He's testified before. He is ultimately the person who makes the decisions.
Well, I mean, I suppose they could ask that. I mean, I think the bigger issue here is there's a lot of things about our system of government that is supposed to happen, and there's lots of measures of accountability that are supposed to occur. In theory, whoever happens to be in power, the government side backbenchers are supposed to be holding the government to account. And yet in practice, for the most part, because of the confidence convention and other reasons, they routinely support the government as opposed to ever kind of saying something critical. So I think the reality here is what has changed to me is political staffers are now public figures. If you are a public figure, it's fair game for you to be able to talk about what it is you're doing in your job.
Well, just help me understand that. What is the definition of a public figure in your view there? I mean, what makes Katie Telford a public figure versus, say, Tim Murphy when he was working for Prime Minister Martin?
So to me, social media has completely changed things. So it used to be that previously we would not hear very much from political staff publicly. They did not have any sort of megaphone. And in fact, a lot of them chose to stay out of the limelight. They purposely were not trying to get any public attention. Mm-hmm. Instead, now what happens with political staff is other political staff are telling them to amplify the party or the government's message. And so they are actively using social media. And sometimes we've had instances, there were some with Jerry Butts, for example, where he was in the fray. And he ended up being a topic in the House of Commons. So I just think that if we're going to have political staff behaving as public figures in one way, then I think it's fair game to say, well, we should be able to ask you questions.
Lori Turnbull, what's your take on that?
To me, that dilutes the whole thing. It dilutes the whole system, because then where do you stop? If you have a prime minister or any minister who's saying there are people in my office who are making decisions on my behalf, I think the right answer from a parliamentary perspective is to say, well, okay, but you're still the person elected. You have to answer, because they are not, in terms of the public realm, even if people are aware of who the prime minister's chief of staff is or who a minister's chief of staff is, they have no accountability to the public. And they're hired. And, as Tim has said, they're at the pleasure of whoever hired them. That doesn't help us at all. A staffer can quit anytime, right? If something goes wrong, people need to be able to ask the minister, and the House of Commons asks the minister during question period. So if you start saying other people can actually speak in a public way for the minister, then you unravel that whole concept, and it's not clear then what the minister is responsible for.
But Tim, what about Alex's point there that they're extremely high profile, verbal, weighing in on the political arguments on social media? I've seen that because you follow them all on Twitter. You do see the argument there. And certainly there seems to be an increasing sense that political staffers are far more powerful than some cabinet ministers and certainly backbenchers when it comes to actually exercising authority in the decision makings of government.
Well, two things. I'm not sure I buy the notion of the authority of the staff. I never spoke in the Prime Minister's name the whole time I served as the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff. Never made that argument, never made that case. I mean, I had been an elected official before I moved into the staff role, fundamentally believed in the notion that the elected officials were ultimately the people accountable and the decision makers. Yes, I was an advisor. Yes, I was part of the information flow, but I didn't decide anything. In terms of the point about engaging in the public debate, I mean, I gave one interview in the whole time I was there because I thought it was an important issue. The notion that somehow you engage in social media makes you accountable seems to me a bit of an odd thing, because I can then choose not to engage in social media. Does that mean I'm not accountable? So the accountability is subject to the decision I make about my role. Seems an odd way to come at it. Or secondly, I then set up a social media amplification group that isn't employed by me outside government, but does amplify it in the party structure or otherwise. And those people have, campaign advisors. And so you end up having the accountability that you want, not in an accountable role. I think it dilutes. Dr. Turnbull's got it right. It totally dilutes where the true authority and responsibility lies, and that is in the people who run for office and get voted into office or out of it, and that's where the judgment's ultimately made and should be made.
Alex Marland, on that dilution point, what's your response? And I wonder if saying staff can testify, does that let ministers off the hook in a way that they don't have to appear and answer for themselves?
I find this. I think we're all agreeing that we're kind of frustrated with the system. And it's just more a matter of trying to figure out how to make it work better. Because I think in principle, we would probably all agree that it would make sense for ministerial responsibility and accountability to be a function of Parliament. But the problem is party discipline is very intense in this country. Party discipline has left the legislature. We used to talk about party discipline in terms of voting. Now we talk about it in terms of message discipline. If you're an elected official, your ability to go out and say things that contravene what the party is saying or go against what a minister might be saying if you're part of the governing party or against the leader, I mean, look what happens to you. So how can we have proper accountability if political parties are so powerful? I'm not suggesting that I know what all the answers are. If anything, I would suggest that this is unfortunately one of those things that we need to study. Donald Savoy, one of Canada's leading academics in this area, says nobody knows what to do about it right now. And he's calling for a royal commission to look into all of this. So I think the reality is that we need to get a better handle on it because we all agree there's a problem. We just can't figure out how to solve it.
Lori Turnbull, just looking ahead to the testimony Katie Telford is going to do on Friday, my sense is she will testify, they will find it unsatisfying, the opposition, in terms of the answers, and then the call will come for the Prime Minister to testify. Do you think this is where this ends up going?
Oh, yes. Yeah. They know that already. And I mean, there are staffers who, you can imagine a scenario where a committee calls a minister to testify and the minister says, no, thank you, I'm not coming, but I'm going to send my staffer. Mm-hmm. And then the staffer says, oh, God, now I'm stuck here in this and I've got to answer all these questions and I'm sweating and this is terrible. But the committee is actually asking for Katie Telford. They're not, at this point, asking for the Prime Minister, and they're acknowledging, we want to know what's going on behind the scenes here. And yes, when they get the unsatisfactory answers, I would be entirely surprised if they did not say, okay, now we want the Prime Minister next.
Tim, as a final point, they aren't just asking for Katie Telford, they're prepared to order her by a majority vote in the legislature to testify. So just put your prognostication hat on for a second, look ahead to Friday. What do you think we're going to see from Katie Telford?
Well, I think we'll see the kind of disciplined approach she's shown when she's testified before. But let's be honest, there actually was a reason, the former Governor General was appointed, because this is an area fraught with secrets. Mm-hmm. There are things I can't tell you right now that I learned when I was Chief of Staff because I'm still subject to the Official Secrets Act. And by the way, when CSIS comes and briefs you about those things, they not only say you cannot, we want you to not take an action or take some action. And by the way, you can't actually reveal why you're taking or not taking that action because we don't want what we're up to be revealed. And I guarantee you that is what's happening behind the scenes. And so she's going to have a bunch of answers where she say, I can't tell you because I'm obliged under the Official Secrets Act, or I'm obliged under cabinet confidentiality. And otherwise you will see disciplined, focused. And as we all know, MPs in these committees have no idea how to ask proper questions anyway. So they'll go on too long, waste their time, and they'll be frustrated mostly because they don't know how to do it well enough themselves.
Well, maybe they'll surprise us all on Friday and we'll get the clarity we've all been looking for. I appreciate you all for taking the time. Lori Turnbull, Alex Marland, and Tim Murphy. Thanks so much, gang.
Thank you.